Welcome back to the channel, guys. I get so excited thinking about photography and talking about photography. It's something I really have been passionate about since I was a young man. So in today's lesson, we're going to be talking about two things to help make your photography more creative by using your shutter speed and your aperture, and how you can use both of them in different ways to create a more artistic picture than, say, what your camera would pick out for you in auto mode just by making a proper exposure. So let's get to the video. Again, guys, I want to start out with this. I got really excited. Last week I got up, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe even 3:30. It doesn't really matter. So I get up and I go out to the place that we've been going out and doing our scouting the last couple of weeks, and the videos that we've done. If you guys haven't checked them out, we'll put a link up here so you can check out those videos. But I got up, I went out real early, and I was thinking, hey, we're going to start doing this, talking about shutter speed, and we're going to talk about aperture, and we're just going to do a video on it. And as I'm sitting there, I realize I'm out in the field, and I realize, and it dawns on me, that we haven't really covered any of it in a kind of a classroom setting and go over kind of the principles and the basics of it. And it just seems like it would make it too hard to do it out in the field. But while I'm sitting there, I've got the lake on one side of me, and I can look off back to the west, and there's fog on the lake, and it's just the sun's coming up, and it's just absolutely beautiful and magical. And I kind of glance over, and I'm looking over to the north, and I see the sun's coming over the top of the trees, and it's just lighting up this beautiful meadow. I'm going to share this image with you that I captured. This doe steps out right as the sun's coming across, and it almost looks like she was lit up with spotlights or strobe, but it's just nature. And one of the things that just gets me so excited, and why I love it so much, and I love being out in the woods when the wildlife are waking up, the birds are waking up, and this is one of my, it's a great capture of what I've seen. So again, I hope you enjoyed that picture. I've got to tell you a couple of real quick things, and we're going to make this simple, we're going to make it quick, and we're going to start out with shutter speed and how you can use that to effectively make a more creative picture. When I was a young boy, I remember thumbing through a magazine, and I came across this picture of this waterfall, and the waterfall was just so beautiful because it would almost look like cotton candy. And I thought to myself, how did this photographer do this? How did he take this picture? I've got to learn how to do this. And back then with the film and everything, it was so expensive to go out and experiment, and there was no YouTube, there was no internet. And I read a lot of magazines, and at some point I figured it out. And basically what happened is your photographer back then he used what you would call a really long shutter speed, and it created that blur in the motion. If you guys remember when we were talking about the 50mm lens, we posted that video last Thursday about the 50mm lens. But I told you, if you're using your 50mm lens, one of the ways to kind of keep from having camera shake is you use your shutter speed versus the focal length of your lens. So a 50mm lens, you'd want to use at least 1/50th of a second. And to be extremely safe, double that number, maybe even go up to 1/125th of a second if you're hand holding the camera. And anyways, to take a long shutter speed, you're going to need a tripod. Don't worry about the tripods. We're going to go into that next week when we talk about the assignment. So just to get you thinking about it, a long shutter speed, you can blur motion. A really quick shutter speed, like say for example your son or your daughter or your grandchildren, they're running as hard as they can and they're diving for the base. Say they're playing baseball or softball, and if you had a really fast shutter speed, you could take that picture and they'd be stopped in motion and it'd look like they was flying. Or say you wanted the reverse of that. Say you wanted the sliding motion. You could do a slow shutter speed, and then you'd see a blur of them sliding into the home base. And that's where it becomes fun as a photographer. You get to make that choice. And that's why shooting in manual is so much more fun for you as a photographer and someone who wants to be creative. If you didn't want to be creative with your photography, you wouldn't be watching this video anyways. You'd just keep your camera on program mode and you'd go out and let it decide. And it may or may not decide the right thing for you, but at the end of the day, you're like, hey, I got a cool picture. Yeah, I'm not taking away from that. That's great. But for you guys that are really wanting to take your skill set and improve and make photos that are more artistic, you can use your shutter speed to do that. Next up on the list is going to be aperture. Aperture, and I want to confuse everybody on aperture. So real quickly, if you think about it, your shutter speed's in 1/50th of a second is how you read that out. On your aperture, you read that as f2.8, f4, f5.6, and so on. What I want you to think about to really demystify, because aperture is where everybody gets confused, instead of f in your brain, mentally think about this, 1 over. Okay, so with that said, if you're shooting at f2.8, 1 over 2.8, you've basically, if you do the math on that, that's a little more than 1/2, right? Following me? So f4, or 1 over 4, which is a quarter, is less than 1/2. Go up to the next, f8, or 5.6, really. It doesn't really matter. Let's just go to f16 for argument's sake. f16, 1/16. That's a small amount of water in your glass versus 1 and 2.8, which is a little more than half. Your f-stop is exactly the same thing, because it's built on a fractional number as well, and that's where the number comes from, and why they didn't do it 1 over 2.8 instead of f2.8 is beyond me. I wasn't there, and good on the guys that invented the cameras, because they did an awesome job and gave us a lot of creative freedom today. So here's where it comes into keeping things simple. If you want to take a really, really good portrait photo of a beautiful young model, or maybe it isn't even a model, maybe it's your beautiful granddaughter, your beautiful grandson, or your wife, or your husband, and you want to really take a great portrait picture of them, what's the easiest thing to do? You simplify that photo so that the viewer is looking at the subject. So how do we do that creatively with our f-stop? Well, it's real easy. Take that number way down, which you're saying down, but it's actually up. Take that number like the f2.8. That f2.8 is a half a glass of water, remember? That f2.8 is a really big hole. That's letting a lot of light into your sensor at that f-stop. Think about this. So you've got your dog's water bowl and you're going to fill it up, but you're using a fireman's hose to do that. When you open up that fire hose and that water comes in so fast because it's coming out of that great big hose, it's going to splash out and go everywhere. Same thing happens essentially when you're using like that f1.4 or 2.8 or whatever. It's a really big opening, it's letting all that light in really, really fast. And that's why you have such a shallow depth of field. So the opposite extreme to that, let's go down to the f16, which is a 16th. You're going to pretend that you're filling up your dog's water bowl with your kid's aquarium hose. It's a real tiny 1/4 inch hose. It's going to take all day to fill up the water bowl, number one. But the water is going to be crystal clear, and you can see all the way to the bottom of the bowl until it fills up all the way to the top, which gives you basically the same thing. You're letting light into the sensor really, really slow, and you get that really, really large depth of field. And that's how your aperture, or your f-stop, works in helping you become a creative photographer. Now, one thing I want to touch on real quick. When you're a photographer, you're going to make friends for life. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that happens. And I've witnessed this over the years of my life as being a photographer, and I really spent a great deal of time, a long time, working with portrait photography, seniors, families, weddings, and that type of stuff. And I built some tremendous relationships. People that I could call on the phone right now, if I needed something, I know they would be there for me because of the photography. No other reason than that. And here's what happened. Several years ago, I shot a young man's wedding. Him and his wife were getting married. He was a police officer at a pretty large department outside the Oklahoma City area. And it was probably 5 years after the wedding, he calls me up and he's like, "Hey Dale," he said, "are you still doing photography?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And he said, "Have you ever taught photography?" And I said, "Well, it's funny that you would ask that because I'm actually helping a couple of people right now, and I'm more what I'd call a mentor as opposed to a official teacher." And he asked me, he said, "I just got transferred into a unit." He said, "There's several new people in my unit." And he said, "It's the CSI unit." And he said, "Part of processing the crime scene for the CSI unit is we have to take pictures." He said, I can use a camera, but he said, "I know that you've got way more knowledge. Is there any way that you could put together a lesson for us and teach us how to use our cameras?" And I was like, "Absolutely. I'll be there. Give me a week." I've already got a lot of this stuff written down, and I've got it in kind of a presentation, if you will. And that's essentially what we're going over today. Is some of this stuff I've actually taught some of this stuff I already taught, and I taught it in a classroom environment for these officers, helping them learn how to use their camera. And you may be thinking to yourself right now, "Dale, what does CSI have to do with creative photography?" Well, absolutely, I'll let you decide. You decide. By the end of the video, comment below and let me know, do you think it has anything to do with being a creative photographer? But at the end of the day, and I put together a 2-day lesson for these officers there in that city, and I taught them the basics just like we did in our first video, and this is basically a very condensed version of shutter speed and aperture and why you would use them, learning how to use your camera, whether you're being creative or not, just getting the scene processed in their case. But one of the things that's really, really important when you're talking about depth of field, and that's your f-stop, is, let's do this real quick, and I want to give you a good example. If say you're taking a portrait shot of me, and you're looking at me and you're like, "Hey, turn your head just a little bit so that I can get some of that beautiful beard of yours." I'm just kidding. I know my beard's old. It's gray, and I'm balding, so it doesn't really matter. But let's just work with me for a second. Number one, what do you focus on when you're taking a portrait of somebody? What's the main focus point of that picture? If you answered eyes, I believe you're on the right track, because you're going to want to focus on the eye. But say you had me turn just a little bit because you want to get some of that highlight bouncing off my beard. Which eye do you focus on? The one that's closest to the camera or the one that's further away from the camera? And I'll let you decide, because that's kind of a creative choice. But here's something that you can do. I showed these series of slides to the officers in the school, because I know that if they're processing a crime scene, they may have to get closer to evidence than what you would with a portrait. But the principle is the same. The closer you are to something, the shallower your depth of field is going to be. So I've got a series of images I'm going to show you real quick while I'm talking about this, but I'm focused on either the 12 or the 16. It doesn't matter. Just look, you can look at the picture and tell. But when you've got a really shallow depth of field, you may only be a 1/4 inch actual of what's in focus of that entire tape measure or ruler or whatever it was. It was actually a Stanley tape measure that I had taped to the wall, but it doesn't matter. And then as you go up your f-stop, your depth of field gets greater and greater. And here's what I want to explain to you as a portrait photographer. You can be focused on my eyes and then have me turn and shift just a little bit. That 1/2 inch difference on a f1.4 or f2.8 might be the difference between this eye being in focus and this one out of focus. Would that be a deal breaker? Maybe, maybe not. If you focused on this eye, but the eye closest to the camera is out of focus, probably most people are going to look at that and be like, "Man, you really had a great shot going there, but you blew it because it wasn't in focus." I know a lot of that's subjective, and art is subjective in and of itself, but I want you to understand this. There's 2 things that you could do to ensure that both of my eyes are in focus if you have me turn slightly. Number one, you could change your aperture from like a 1.4 to 2.8. That little bit of difference might give you that 1/2 inch or 1 inch difference between this eye and that eye if I'm looking this direction. or her, the model, whatever. Or you could take a step back, creating a little bit more distance between you and the subject. It's going to give you a little bit greater depth of field than if you was right up close to the subject with a 50mm lens. And both of those things would make sure that both of my eyes are still in focus, but the background will be blurred out, so that way the focus, the attention is drawn to the subject. And that's part of the simplicity. When I say making your image simple, that's part of what you're trying to do, is get the viewer to look at the subject. And if you have a big cluttered out background, they're going to be struggling. Like say you had your model standing in front of a brick wall. Well, if she's in front of that brick wall, people might start looking at the cracks in the brick. They might start looking at all kinds of stuff. You use that large aperture like the 1.4 or the 2.8 or whatever, and now the focus is going to be on the subject because that background's blurred. Another way to make the background blur a little bit more is have her take 2 steps off of the brick wall. Create a little bit of distance there, and now she's probably closer to you. And when she's closer to you, the depth of field's even shallower, just the same as like keeping the eyes in focus. If you take a step back, you're increasing that depth of field a little bit. You can do these things creatively. Okay, so here's one of the things I did towards the end of the first day with this group of officers. I put up a series of images, and this is going to be kind of fun if you guys enjoy playing games. But what I did is I put up a series of images and I let them guess what f-stop that particular image was taken at. And I'm going to do the same thing with you guys. If you guys want to play along, you can comment down below. If you don't want to guess what the aperture is, because there's no right, there's no wrong answer. If you put one on, say, slide number 1, you think it's f2.8 or whatever, just explain why you think that, or slide number 2. Feel free to hit pause and you can go through and answer all these. If you don't want to, but you still enjoy playing the game, comment down below and let me know. Say, hey, that's really kind of fun. I haven't seen it done on YouTube, but I think it would be kind of fun. So I don't know where I was at and my battery died on my camera. Good for me. I knew it was getting low, but I thought I could speed this thing up. But again, one of the things that me and my wife used to do back when we lived in Oklahoma City is occasionally we'd pull up another local photographer and we would discuss, hey, first image that pops up on the website is we'd look at the image and we'd be like, hey, what f-stop do you think it was taken at? What kind of lighting was it? Was it natural lighting or strobe lighting? And we'll get more into the lighting as we get deeper into these lessons, but it just gives you something to think about and then kind of come up with a reason why, or why you think it was taken that way, or what you could do as a photographer to make the image better. And ultimately, that's part of the reason that we're on here anyways. We're wanting to learn more. We're wanting to be more creative. We're wanting to be a better artist than what we already are. And like I've said before, it's always great to go and look at other people's images and look at them, but do not compare your work to theirs. Compare your work last month to this month and ask yourself, am I getting better? You can go and look at people that are extreme pros. There's always going to be somebody better. It doesn't matter what you're talking about, whether you're talking about bicyclists or whether you're talking about weightlifters or any kind of sport. You pick it out. There's always going to be somebody better. And not to get discouraged, because we should be looking at people that are better and asking ourselves, what can we do to get our images up to that level? But I don't want you to get discouraged and say, oh, I can never be that good. Well, that's nonsense. You can. The thing that you have to realize is the more we practice, the better we get. And just like a guy that's got a black belt in Taekwondo, he didn't just walk in there and then a month later walk out as a black belt. He spent years practicing that art and that art form of Taekwondo and became that master level black belt. It didn't happen overnight. It took years of practice. Same thing with photography. If you want to master your craft, my wife, she does leather work. I taught her how to do leather work several years back. She has mastered that craft and she is far better now than I am. I do a fair amount of leather work, but not on the level that she does because she does it every day. Again, guys, We appreciate your likes, comments, and subscribes. I hope that this has helped. We are back in the New York Institute of Photography. We've completed the Unit 1. We've done all the quizzes, we've done the test, and we've got our photo assignment coming up. So next week, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing this exact assignment, which is why I had to stop what I was doing last week and come back in and cover this classroom stuff as quickly as we can so that we can get back out in the field and be shooting and having fun. But the photo assignment for our first unit of the New York Institute of Photography School is shutter speed. You're going to do a slow shutter speed to convey movement or motion, as well as a fast shutter speed to stop movement or motion. And then the next thing is going to be using an aperture that's going to, you decide as a photographer, but I'm sure that they're wanting two. They're wanting one with a wide range of depth of field and why you would use it in that particular photograph, as well as a shallow depth of field and why. And again, in my mind, the portrait's the most obvious. But again, guys, we appreciate your likes, comments, and subscribes, and we'll be doing that video next week. Until next week, if you guys haven't checked out, we recently watched a video on the New York Institute of Photography's website where a guy who's graduated from in the past, like I have, and he did a video, and basically the synopsis of the video is, you guys have all heard the term, a picture's worth 1,000 words. What's 1,000 pictures worth? I did a video similar to his. It's a spin-off of his, obviously using my own images. I posted that this last Tuesday. Go check that out until next week and let me know what you think. Again, guys, we appreciate your likes, comments, and subscribes. Comment down below. If you like our video, give us a big thumbs up. If you hate the video, hit the dislike button twice. That way we can keep a better track of who likes our videos and who don't. And again, until next time, let's go shoot some stuff.